Welcome to Modern Farm Business Podcast. This podcast is designed to help the farm leader bring their business to the next level. We'll cover everything from leadership and finance to strategy and planning. I'm your host, Dean Hefta. On our previous 3 episodes, we've been discussing communication skills, like talking when stakes are high, running effective meetings, and even how to better talk with people that aren't in agriculture. Beyond these topics, though, is one of the bigger sources of frustration I hear from farmers, and that revolves around working with and around people from different generations. These differences can cause friction and frustration, and that can lead to stress in the relationship and even safety issues because of a breakdown in communication. So today, we're going to dig into those generational differences. And to help us to understand this topic better, I've invited Cam Marston to join us. Cam is the leading expert on generational change and its impact on the workplace and marketplace. He and his firm, Generational Insights, have provided research and consultation for over 20 years, and he's the author of Generational Insights and Motivating the What's in It for Me workforce. Cam, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Proud to be included.
Yeah, it's great. This is such a timely and important topic when it comes to agriculture. We deal with so much of this intergenerational play, and your expertise is in the area of generational change and demographics. And so when I hear people share their frustrations about another generation, when you hear somebody say, you know, though this generation coming up or that generation over there, what goes through your mind?
Most people quickly point to what's different about another generation. Here's how they're different, whether it be the obvious ones that people have been noticing for hundreds of years, music and hairstyle and clothing and their own uses of words, change the use of words. Most people point to that, but what they very seldom do is ask themselves how I'm different. Rather, they point and say, this is how they're different from me. But they never look at themselves and say, how might I be different from them? Furthermore, very few people seem to be willing to study or think about where these differences may have come from. And in truth, they've come from the parents, the previous generations. Every generation is shaped by a previous generation. So when they point and say, here's how they're different, they usually don't spend time thinking, well, how might I be different and how might I have created them? So in my work, I hear a lot of people pointing out the foibles or what's wrong with or work ethic issues, which I'm sure you and I will get into. And I take it upon myself to make sure they realize that none of these generational characteristics which define other people were created in a vacuum. They came from someplace, oftentimes from the parents themselves that are doing the complaining.
So when we're seeing these differences, and we call them a different generation, so this generation is that, and this generation is that, and we're looking at it from our perspective, and we're seeing what's different. How much of it is actual generation, so Generation X or Millennials or things like that, and how much of it is just they're just younger?
Well, you've got a great question, and I think it's a good point to make early in our conversation. There are very real generational differences that are shaped by shared experiences in what I call the coming of age years. Mid-teens to mid-20s are some big ones. And what you see and feel and remember and experience or watch happen to other people becomes who you are, and it shapes you for the rest of your life. And an easy way of understanding that is I have a 94-year-old grandmother that lives down in Florida, and what she experienced in her coming of age years was the Great Depression and the Second World War. And today at 94, those memories still shape much of her behavior today. She's very thrifty. She has, I wouldn't say a lot of money, but she sure doesn't need to save every rubber band that she sees. She doesn't need to live this extraordinarily thrifty lifestyle. Each of us as a generation have memories that we share as a generation that have shaped our behaviors today, and those behaviors will remain a part of us for the rest of our lives. The other part that needs to be mentioned, the other side of the coin, I guess, is life stages. So we have generational characteristics, which are shaped by our experiences in the coming of age years. And then you have life stages. Life stages are a different thing. The big life stages that each one of your listeners, our listeners today, will probably go through: marriage, having children, buying a home, becoming independent of your mother and father. Those are life stages. And once you go through a life stage, the world looks differently to you. For example, when I became independent of my parents, I noticed that now that I'm paying my own bills, I turned the lights off in the house more frequently in the house that I was living with. I adjusted the thermostat so that it wasn't either heating or cooling all the time. Now that I'm through that independence life stage and the bills are my responsibility, it's changed me. Similarly with parenting. Once you hold that first baby of your own, you think, man, this is for real now. Life stages change the way you look, and a part of the generational conversation must include life stages, because once you're through those life stages, you see the world differently. And a lot of the generational conversation happens between one generation that has been through a life stage and another generation that hasn't yet gotten there. And that's a big thing to understand, that after those life stages happen, your behavior will change.
Yeah, that's a good distinction, because it's vastly different how somebody views the world because they survived through World War II versus the fact that they're in their 40s or their 60s or at different life stages, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. And I actually had a guy tell me years ago, what would do you people good? He was kind of a pessimistic guy. But what would do your generation good is a nice world war. Thought, is there such thing as a nice world war? That's an awful high price to pay to give me what he felt was some humility and some needed, perspective. And he's right that I, as a parent, today see the world a little bit differently, certainly than a parent would years back, versus somebody that's not a parent yet. Those life stages versus generational characteristics are big differentiators, and they need to be spelled out clearly in any generational conversation, the significance of life stages versus generational preferences.
So you mentioned any current generation has been shaped by their parents. Could you go back to that and just expand on what's an example of maybe something we're seeing or something we have seen that is actually the outcome of the parental experience?
There's a great one. And 9/11 brought about many things, one of which began the baby boomer generation's desire to really protect and enhance the lives of their children. In the nomenclature of the day, it's now called the helicopter parent. 9/11 created the baby boomer helicopter parent. Now, an important thing to realize is the boomers are the parents of the millennials, also known as Gen Y, born since 1980 to 2000. So the boomers became the helicopter parents of the millennial generation. Hover, protect, enhance, all this kind of stuff that we've heard about. What we're seeing is, as this millennial generation has entered into the workplace, they're used to being really taken care of, really protected, well cared for, given lots of attention, needing in the workplace today, stimulated. Another one, parents were really responsible for making sure their children remain stimulated in whatever it is that they do. So the workplace today is often full of millennials that have been raised this way and are seeking attention from employers, seeking attention from bosses that in the past generations have never done. They may want acknowledgement or recognition for things that are just a standard part of the job. Now, that's from the point of view of that baby boomer manager or boss or supervisor. Why do you want attention for this stuff? This is just a part of the job. When I get large groups of human resource managers in front of me in a seminar or workshop, I will often ask them, how many of you feel like the youngest members of your workforce simply want to be recognized for showing up every day? And a great number of the hands go up. Yeah, there seems to be this demand of our youngest workforce, the millennials, and their need for attention and recognition for simply coming to work every day. And that's that baby boomer helicopter parenting design coming out in the young workforce of recognize me, stimulate me for doing what historically has been normal, average, bottom tier level work. I mean, this is work 101. You come to work, you're expected to be there on time, yet there's a demand for recognition from the youngest members of the workplace. That's 9/11, creating that baby boomer helicopter parent, which has created that youngest element of the workplace entering the workplace seeking things that historically workers never had wanted before.
So is it safe to say that with parenting philosophies, there always ends up being unintended consequences that happen years later?
Yeah, a repercussion that no one could have anticipated. I mean, I'm a Generation Xer. My children are all part of what's called the iGen, younger yet than the Millennials. And the cry from Generation X is a helicopter parent is an awful thing. We will not do this to our children. Doesn't mean we're going to ignore them or leave them alone, but instead of being a helicopter parent, I am going to raise free-range children. I'm going to let them roam and let them run. I'm going to keep an eye on them through the technology, but I'm going to let them roam and let them run. And one of these days, we will begin to see the implications of raising, quote-unquote, free-range children. Who knows what it'll be? It'll be something we didn't expect, but it certainly will be something.
So I'm running a farm or I'm running a small business and I'm dealing with these generational issues. And what I hear from people in business, people that are running farms that have employees or family members on them is this complaint. And you mentioned it earlier, and that is, boy, they just don't have the work ethic that my generation had, or they don't work hard while they're here, or they're always asking if they can get off at 4:00 on Friday. Is it this same kind of life stage issue I'm dealing with, or is this an actual generational shift?
That's a good one, and it's a mixture of both. I think there are life stage issues that once you are through some of these critical life stages of childbirth, of independence, of home ownership, marriage, the work ethic, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes, of previous generations begins to make more sense. But before those life stages, roughly from ages 28 and younger, there is the desire, I guess, that the workplace make them happy. And I can promise you, if there's anybody listening that's a baby boomer or older, maybe even a Generation Xer, there was never the expectation that the workplace would make them happy. I want to have a good job that makes me happy. They roll their eyes at that. However, the younger generations have been raised, and our society has kind of enhanced this, that you need to go find a good job that makes you happy. And as they enter the workplace, getting off at 4:00 would make them happy. As they're young in their job, working that hard for that many hours in a row, that just doesn't make me happy. And it's not until those life stage moments have come through, and on the other side of those, that they say, you know what, the workplace will never make me happy. I make me happy. The workplace is simply where I work. And once those life stages has happened, you get a more consistent and predictable employee. Now, there's another element coming into play here that I think needs to be drawn out, and that is that people tend to want to remember themselves the way they wish they were. In other words, if I'm a baby boomer, I may think of myself as a 25-year-old with a very hard, intense, time-intensive work ethic. Well, we clearly see from the research that the baby boomer job turnover rate when they were in their 20s was higher than the millennials is today. So there's people who want to remember themselves the way they wish they were, and they'll talk about other generations that way. Boy, when I was your age, I had a strong work ethic. When I was your age, I worked from dawn to dusk on a regular basis and put my back to the wheel and all that. Whereas the truth, not so much. We want to remember the way we wish we were instead of the way we really were. And when people complain about the work ethic of the next generation, what they're often not realizing is they probably looked a little similar themselves.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Appreciate that. So I hire a talented, smart, technologically savvy young gun. He comes in, has everything I want, but doesn't have really any work experience and already expects a 6-figure income and a vehicle and all the perks that go along with it. How do I manage this gap between paying your dues and, being talented?
There is now this is in the corporate world that some of your listeners may or may not be able to adopt. In the corporate world, they give them the forward-leaning organizations that have figured out how to work with this type of millennial that you've described. give them what is essentially a career guide. Here's what you can expect in a career here. And it's measured out in years. Years 1 through 5, this is what you're going to do and learn. 6 through 10, this is what you're going to do and learn. And it also lists the perks. If you make it through this and you succeed and perform, then here's what you can expect in years 6 through 10 that are the perks, the bigger salary, the cars, whatever, the company car, whatever it may be. You're dealing with some unmanageable expectations in finding a young gun who has tech savvy, because oftentimes what they're comparing with is what they read in the Wall Street Journal and some article somewhere about what they give the highest, most elite tech people out in Silicon Valley. That is such an extraordinary work environment that there aren't many places in the world that can offer those types of perks. Furthermore, it's an extraordinarily profitable, some of these Silicon Valley companies, extraordinarily profitable, huge margins. Farm simply didn't like that. And the interview, the onboarding conversation, the prior to the hire conversation is, here's realistically what this work is going to be like and what you can expect. So that young gun who comes on board and expects high salaries and all the top company perks, some of that responsibility needs to go back to the person or the farm or the management team that hired that individual, because they didn't paint an accurate picture of what it was like to work there. They hired somebody with talent without painting the picture of what they could expect. So there is an onus of responsibility on the hirers to say, here, let's be clear. This is what it's like here. And these perks that you may think might happen someday, but they're not a part of the job. They are not a right of anyone coming to work here. They're a privilege of those that do very well over a period of time. That needs to be spelled out very clearly so that there are no surprises.
That's helpful. It really is my responsibility as a leader to get really clear on my expectations and what reality is here.
Undoubtedly. And I think there's assumption, kind of what we've talked about a little bit earlier. There's an assumption of the leader that they get it, that the next generation gets it, that they understand, that they know what the workplace is like. But in so many cases in our society today, many don't. Their first real job is they've not had a lot of work experience until they enter the workplace. So there's not a lot of summer jobs in many parts of our economy. Summer jobs, jobs during college, whatever it may be. The first real job is when they enter the workplace, and their expectations have never been modified by any real work experience. And the employer says, well, they get it. They know what it's like to work. And suddenly you've got a new hire who wants a company car day 2. And you think, where did this attitude come from? Well, we know where it came from. It's come from a lot of the Silicon Valley stuff. But a part of that responsibility is on the hirer to not manage those expectations.
You mentioned this lack of summer job or lack of work experience that people are now coming into the full-time world with. Is that a change that is going to stay and that's going to have lasting impact, that people aren't starting to work until they're in their 20s?
It's a good question, and I don't know. I think parents, I think employers want to see work experience. At the same time, the further niched each of the expertise or specialties in our economy become, the more it demands education and not summer work experience or college work experience. So though employers may want it, they also want people that enter the workplace with a unique niche or capability that likely required a lot of specialty education, which prohibits the summer or the college work. So I'm not clear exactly what's going to happen on that. I certainly have kind of watched it for the past 10 years, and I've not seen a return to summer jobs or college jobs like I had once seen.
Cam, you've done a lot of work on demographic studies and measuring these generational biases. And like you said earlier, it's really easy to pick out the things that are different or the things that we don't like about the next generation. But what's something or some things that you're seeing that gives you hope that maybe there's some strengths coming that you're excited about?
Well, that's a great question. And there are quite a handful that I can think of quickly. First, one of the weaknesses in Generation X, born between 1965 and 1979, is their lack of desire, inability to shape and run and manage teams. One of the holes in the armor of Generation X is their ability to lead teams. The hope is that the millennial generation is a very team-oriented group. They're very social and team. They have a lot of social and team focus, which Generation X does not. So I think there's great hope in millennial team leadership coming down the road. It's beginning to show up, but the bulk of it is down the road. The second thing is the significance of the life stages, and that how most people, once they've come through those life stages, become more predictable in their workplace behaviors. They show up early, they stay late. Once those life stages have happened, they become more, and I hesitate to use this, but it's the truth, more baby boomer in their workplace focus. They don't become the baby boomers. They begin to replicate those boomers' behaviors a little bit more predictably, maybe not to the same degree, but people begin to recognize their work behaviors. I think there's always hope around the transition of technology and what it's doing to our society around us. At the same time, there's a fear that too much technology takes away the interpersonal component of it, which is so important to any society, is the ability to connect with and bond and relate to the people that you work with and live around. So there's lots of reasons for hope. Life stages, millennial team management. I think the baby boom generation today is realizing the significance of their wisdom, difference between skill and wisdom, the significance of their wisdom and how important it is that it gets transferred so that the next generation can keep the lessons learned by the baby boomers handy and apply them in their own work environments. The boomers for a while had said, it's not my job, it's not my responsibility, I don't want to have to do this to transfer my wisdom. Now they seem more interested in it, and I think that also is very hopeful.
Perfect. So let's whittle it down here. I got a couple of questions for you. One is, if I'm 25, what is something that you really want me to know? And if I'm 55, what's something that I should know when it comes to this whole generational dynamic?
If I have the opportunity to look a 25-year-old in the eye, and they're really interested in doing well in their workplace, I'm going to tell them the following. Your employer really doesn't care about how you would want to change things and make them, in your opinion, better, more efficient, quicker, etc., until you've proven to that employer that you understand their systems and why those systems are in place. You've not been hired to come into a new workplace and explode it. You've been hired to come into a new workplace and replicate it. And once you can replicate it consistently and predictably, you can go to your employer and say, I think I have an idea. But no one's interested in you changing their system until you've proven you know how and why their system works. And that takes time and effort and patience. If I look at a 55-year-old in the eye and they're interested in learning something, I'm going to tell them, you as a 55-year-old are going to try to relate to a 25-year-old. But I want you to understand, 55-year-old, how different you are from them and how the world you experience as 25 is not similar at all to the way it is to today's 25-year-old. Don't ever say, I'll say to the 55-year-old, when I was your age, because it's an irrelevant conversation in our society today. The change happens so quick. So don't try to put yourself in the shoes of a 25-year-old to see the world through their eyes. It's not even similar to when you were 25. I'd spend time explaining the significance of the gap in a 25-year-old yesterday and a 25-year-old today, and how they need to steer clear of trying to say, when I was your age, this is what I wanted, so I'll do the same for you. It's just not relevant anymore.
This has been very helpful. Cam, if somebody wants to get into more of what you're working on and some of your insights, where should they go?
The easiest place to go is cammarston.com, CAMMARSTON.com. It'll drive them to the website of the company called Generational Insights. We offer keynotes and seminars. We've got an excellent brand new workshop on managing multi-generational teams that's designed for leaders, supervisors, managers, and how to get a high-performance team out of an age-diverse workforce. We've got books and columns and all kinds of support guides that come out of our research on this topic, and we're always updating it. They go to that website, they'll see a lot of content that can help them a great deal.
Cam, thanks so much for your time today and the work that you've done in helping people understand these generational differences.
I'm, like I said, flattered to be asked to be a part of this. The best wishes to all your listeners. I hope they can work it out. I sure appreciate the work that they do.
Thank you. I hope you got as much out of this discussion as I did. A couple of things that stood out to me include understanding the difference between the life stage a person is in versus their generation. The responsibility a 22-year-old feels because of their stage in life, as opposed to the parenting and experiences in their generation that they grew up with, is important to differentiate. I also found it humbling to realize that we all remember ourselves the way we wish we were rather than how we actually were. And when I was the age of the younger worker, I was probably more like them than I want to admit. So, as leaders, we really have that responsibility to know ourselves and to meet people where they're at. These generational insights can keep us from falling into the trap of blaming an entire generation for the issue and focus on what we can do to increase the performance of our team. Now, as always, you can find the show notes for this episode in PDF version at modernfarmbusiness.com. Be sure to subscribe where you get your podcasts. Tell a friend about Modern Farm Business Podcast and send me an email if you have any thoughts or ideas or questions at dean@modernfarmbusiness.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.